Susie and Jane were twins and living in LA. Susie was very busy with her YouTube channel, where she spoke about different wellness tips and makeup tutorials. Jane was checking through her Instagram while Susie was speaking into the camera, doing a live stream. She said, "Hello guys, welcome to my live stream, and today I'm going to be giving ye great wellness tips on how to relax and get a better night's sleep. And having a great night's sleep not only adds to your physical well-being, but your mental well-being also. And I will also be sharing some delicious vegan recipes with ye that are also gluten-free." The live stream took about an hour, and afterwards Susie checked her emails and answered as many comments as she could. Susie was really looking forward to sign a new endorsement deal, which would bring her in millions. She had a secret idea with her and her partners who were teaming with her. Everything was going great until Jane went missing. Susie explained to her partners that she would continue with her Secrets to Success idea in a few weeks, but right now she had to concentrate on getting her sister back. Susie spoke into the camera during a live stream. "Hi everyone, I have some very sad news for you today. My twin sister Jane has gone missing. If anyone knows anything about her whereabouts, please contact me or your local police station." The views were going up and up during the stream, and news of Jane's disappearance spread like wildfire. Soon it was front page news, and on almost every news station. Susie couldn't believe that the team she was partnering with were putting so much pressure on her. When she was all alone in her house, she walked down to her basement and turned the light on. She took the gag off her twin sister and put a gun to her head and said, "Okay, Susie, you either give me that secret idea you have that you got that $1 million deal, or I'm going to shoot you in your head and tell them I have another idea. I am sick and tired of all your stupid videos of you flaunting yourself and acting like you know it all. Now I'm in your place, which proves what I always thought but never told you. I'm just as good as you, and as a matter of fact, I'm much better than you." Suddenly there was a noise at the stairs. Jane turned around. A guy was standing holding a gun and said, "You bitch, I knew you were crazy from your videos, and now look at you, holding your own twin sister at gunpoint." The man, who was a stalker of Susie from months, shot Jane in her head, thinking it was Susie, and untied Susie, thinking it was Jane. Thanks for watching The Assassin Rapper, and if you enjoy the content, then make sure to subscribe and hit the bell to be notified of new content. Jessie and her friend Kayla were at home watching a horror movie when they started talking about the local legend, Slender Man. Jessie was saying, "Slender Man is real. He isn't just a made-up character." Kayla said, "Do you really expect me to believe you that a 10-foot thin man is real and you have seen him? Why didn't you take a photo of him with your phone then?" Jessie was getting annoyed and gave Kayla an angry look and said, "Okay, you don't believe me? Well, I can take you to the woods tomorrow to meet a friend of mine, which will prove Slender Man is real." Kayla replied, "Okay, you're on." The next night, Jessie and Kayla went out to the woods. They were walking down the woods when they saw a box with first clue written on it. Jessie asked Kayla to see what was inside. Kayla said, "I suppose you think I'm afraid to open it." Then she opened it and retrieved a map where to go, looking for the next clue. As they walked about 10 minutes deep into the woods, they came across the next clue, which was another box. Kayla opened it again, and there was a map which apparently would lead them to the proof of Slender Man. As they walked towards where the map led them, there was a very high tree with a box hanging from it, saying proof. Kaylee said to Jessie, "There's no way I'm climbing that tree." Jessie said, "Turn around and close your eyes for 5 seconds. Then you can turn back around again and open them." Kayla said, "What are you playing at?" Jessie said, losing her patience, "Do you want to see the proof of Slender Man or not?" Kayla turned around and counted to 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. When she turned back, Jessie had the box next to her on the ground. Kayla asked her, "How did you climb way up there so fast? And what about this friend of yours you promised you'd show me? Where is he or she? Show me the proof of Slender Man being real. You told me your friend would show me the proof of Slender Man being real. How long do I have to wait to see the proof?" "Let me answer your first question first, and the second after," Jessie said. "First, I didn't climb the tree, and the answer to your second question is, my friend is over there, and he is the one who picked the box from the tree." Jessie pointed over towards the trees, and Kayla screamed when she saw the Slender Man. Thanks for watching the Assassin Rapper, and if you enjoy the content, then make sure to subscribe and hit the bell to be notified of new content. When Sarah was small, she used to always be afraid of the dark. She hated the dark even more now, and she hated her own shadow. It started when she was 7 years old. Her and her twin sister were in their room, and they borrowed a horror book from their mom. Sarah was spooking her twin sister Katie out by pretending there was shadows going to get her, and they were on the wall. Sarah realized that she could make shadows on the wall and spooked Katie out every time she turned around. Suddenly something fell, and Katie got such a fright she backed back and fell off her bunk bed and out the top story window and was killed instantly. 15 years later, Sarah still gets flashbacks every time she sees her own shadow. She went to counselling and everything over it. She knew she had to get rid of her fear. She knew it was awful what happened, but she knew she had to finally put it behind her. She wasn't going to look at her shadow anymore. What Sarah couldn't see, as she was walking down the street, is her own shadow take out a knife. Suddenly she heard a voice saying, "Don't you think you can outrun your shadow?" Sarah was certain she had shook off her obsession of her shadow, but turned around because she knew that the voice was not in her head. She froze in horror, because in all the years she just saw her shadow, not her shadow moving differently than her, and definitely not her shadow holding a knife. Suddenly the shadow lunged the knife into her and walked into her, then healed instantly and walked down the street. Katie was practicing walking down the street. "Hi, my name is Sarah." Thanks for watching the Assassin Rapper, and if you enjoy the content then make sure to subscribe and hit the bell to be notified of new content. Joe was a therapist that saw lots of different patients with different problems, but little did he know that one of his patients would create a huge problem for him. Joe was having an affair with a lady called Lucy, but unluckily for Joe, one of his patients, Tom, spotted them kissing on the street one night. Joe was kicking himself how stupid he was, but his patient Tom would not give up on it. He knew he would not give up, ever, until he got what he wanted. He knew that was his MO. Joe worried about it a lot, until one session Joe had a plan. Tom had threatened Joe he would tell his wife about the affair, and Joe knew he wasn't kidding. But Joe came up with a plan that he knew would work. Joe said to Tom, "Okay Tom, I know that I've been sitting here telling you for months about you having to control your urges, and I know that you have some crazy fantasies that would get most people locked up in prison, but I have an idea for you. I created a plan that you could live out one of your fantasies that you were always talking about. This fantasy, Tom, is what I'm talking about. This fantasy would get you locked up, and I mean locked up for a very long time. But what I'm getting at, Tom, is I can make this happen for you. I can make this fantasy become a reality with no repercussions." Tom gave Joe a curious look, wondering what he was about to say. Then he said, "What is this plan of yours, may I ask?" Joe took a breath and said, "Okay, well, I never gave in to one of my wife's fantasies, for the simple fact I know this might sound hypocritical when I'm a cheater myself, but I would never want my wife to sleep with another man. However, it is one of her fantasies to a stranger walk into her bedroom in the middle of the night and have sex with her. Now, what I am offering you is that chance to you be that stranger to walk in and have sex with my wife. But only if you promise me you won't breathe a word of my affair to her, and don't ever breathe a word to her or anyone else." Tom sat back smiling, then said, "Now, I must say, that sounds like a plan." Joe and Tom spoke for another 15 minutes, organising to him call over tomorrow night. He gave his address and time. The next session Joe was feeling a lot better, as he knew Tom loved the plan, and he had promised not to tell his wife. Now that he is giving him the chance of having sex with her. Lisa was Joe's next patient. She was beaten by her husband for months before she finally had the opportunity to leave him. Joe asked how things were going. Lisa said, "I am so jumpy at everything. I can't even walk down the street without thinking my husband is following me. It's got so bad I sleep with a loaded gun." The next day Tom was happy about what was going to happen tonight. He smiled at the fact of him getting the chance to sleep with his therapist's wife. It all felt so exciting to him, a stranger walking into her room in the dark and having sex. That night he drove over to Joe's house. The door was open and he walked up the stairs to the room where Joe told him his wife would be. It was exactly 1 a.m. and Joe told him he would be gone out for a walk. Tom walked up to the bed and could see Joe's wife lying there. He wondered, was she pretending to be asleep, or was she really? He kneeled down next to her, about to kiss her, when her eyes opened and she screamed. She reached for her gun and shot Tom in the head. Joe looked out from his car across the street, smiling, knowing that Tom will be no more problem to him, and he drove off proud of himself for giving Tom the address of his patient Lucy, who he knew had a gun, right there beside her bed. He smiled, wondering, did she not realize she tells him every single session about having a gun by her bed? He knew she would blow Tom's head off instantly when she knew a stranger was in her house. Joe drove home and snuck back into bed. He was hoping his wife wouldn't wake up. Luckily for him, she didn't. He didn't want to have to explain anything. He was looking forward to the morning to tell his darling wife how much he loved her. Stephanie had schizophrenia and could see things that weren't really there. It could happen her anywhere. She really believed the things she saw were real, which was when she first saw and heard a baby cry next door. She wondered, was she just imagining things? But what really made her paranoid was last week she saw her next door neighbour, Sarah, look around when she came out of her car to see was anyone looking, and she was holding a baby. She knew what she saw, but even though she saw that, she first thought maybe she had imagined the whole thing until she heard the baby cry a few more nights. She told her parents, but they didn't want to know. Her dad just told her that she was imagining it all, and if she went to the police about her next door neighbour kidnapping a baby, then she would be put away. They would say that her hallucinations are causing other people harm and could cause herself harm. Stephanie didn't know what to do, but she knew what she saw and knew it wasn't just one of her imaginations. She said to her mom, "Mom, we need to call the police and get them to go to that woman's house, because she definitely is hiding a baby in there. You know she told us many times she is living alone, and why would she say that if she had a baby? Plus, if she is babysitting a baby, and if it's all legit, then the police will know, and she won't get into trouble, but we can't just keep quiet and do nothing." Stephanie's mom, Greta, said, "Sweetie, you have seen so many different monsters and demons and whatever else that aren't there. This is just another one of those." Stephanie said, "Please, Mom, just go over and ask the lady, is there a baby with her, and who does it belong to?" Her mom sighed and told her to get some sleep. The next day, Stephanie came into her kitchen for her breakfast and said to her dad, "Where's Mom?" Her dad said, "I tried to stop her. She's actually gone over to our neighbour's house confronting her about your wild accusations that obviously are not true." Stephanie ran out the door before he could say anything else. She ran over to her neighbour's house and broke a window, then climbed in. When she was in the room, her mom was standing next to her neighbour, who was pointing a gun at her, and she turned to look at Stephanie and said, "Well, well, look who has joined the party. Your mom here asked me whose baby I had in my house. Well, it's your damn father's baby. He decided to knock me up and didn't tell me keep the baby quiet because people will only start talking. Now I can't have anything come between me and your dad. You see, he loves me way more than you and your mom." Suddenly Stephanie's mom ran and tried to grab the gun out of the woman's hand, and then the gun went off. They both looked at the door to see it was her dad who was just entering the room. He fell down on the ground as the bullet hit him. He looked up at his wife and said, before dying, "What? Why?" Stephanie's mom still had the gun in her hand and shot the woman who was running at her with a knife. Stephanie said, "Mom, tell the police it was me. I have schizophrenia. They will let me off." Stephanie's mom said, "No, I did this. I will tell the truth." A few minutes later, the police arrived, and a police officer said, "Police, is there anyone else in the house?" Stephanie said, "That woman tried to kill us, and she shot my dad." The police officer looked at Stephanie's mom and said, "I'm afraid you have to come to the police station with me." Stephanie said, "Not her, the other woman." The police officer said, "What other woman?" Stephanie's mom was smiling, in a daze, talking to herself. Thanks for watching The Assassin Rapper, and if you enjoy the content, then make sure to subscribe and hit the bell to be notified of new content. Brenda and Tony were driving along the countryside on a December night. They were on a road trip for 2 weeks as a part of unwinding from a lot of hard work doing up their new house. The plan was to stay in several motels along the way and enjoy the road trip and eating out in diners and enjoying the scenery in between. It was just about getting dark when Brenda was surprised to see a hitchhiker on the road. She said to Tony, "Do you see that?" Tony said, "Yeah, I wonder who is it, way out here." The couple decided to stop, and the hitchhiker said, "Hi there, my name is Paul. I would really love if you could give me a drive just a few miles up the road to the next motel, please. I took the wrong bus and I'm walking miles." Tony said, "Sure, hop in the back." The man's name was Peter. When he was in the back, he began to speak. "I was sure happy to see you guys come along. I must have been walking for miles. I was about to drop unconscious with tiredness from all the walking, and believe me, I'm not fit enough to walk that long. But ye guys, where are ye from? Let me guess. The big city, or maybe you're from the suburbs. Maybe you're the type of people that look down on folk like me." Brenda and Tony found that comment to be strange. Tony said, "Excuse me? Why would we look down on you?" Peter suddenly pulled out a gun and pointed it to Brenda's head and said, "I'll tell you why you look down on me, because I've a gun held to your girlfriend, or is it your wife's head, and you're probably saying to yourself, I'm crazy." Tony said in a voice filled with fear and shock, "What the hell, man? Put away that gun." Peter said, "I do the talking around here, now keep driving." Brenda began to feel around her pocket for her phone and pretended to sneeze, to look down and press 911. When she did, she kept the phone on, hoping it would be traced. Tony said, "Look man, I don't know what's going on, okay? but I know that we did nothing to you, so please just put the gun away." Suddenly, Peter shouted, "Stop the damn car." Brenda shouted, "Please, no, please stop, just leave us alone." When the car stopped, Peter shot Tony in the back of his head, and he died instantly. The hitchhiker shouted to Brenda, "You're lucky I'm not going to kill you, bitch," and he ran out of the car. Brenda picked the phone up and said to the 911 operator, "Please help me, please, my husband has just been killed by some guy we picked up." 10 minutes later, the police arrived and took a statement from Brenda. Brenda was sitting inside her home that herself and Tony had recently refurbished. There was a noise at the door, and a figure walked into the room. She could see that it was Peter the hitchhiker. He pulled out a gun and pointed at her. Then he smiled and said, "Bang, bang." She smiled back at him and said, "I have your money, and thanks for taking this job. He actually was cheating on me all the while we were doing up our new home." Peter said, "I actually must give you credit for this idea and coming up with the 911 call, etc. But as much as I'd love to stay around for tea, I need to get going, because if your police or neighbours see me, then who knows, tongues might start wagging and they might ask questions." Brenda asked, "What do you mean? How will they trace you to all this? They never even saw your face." Peter said, "I know, but I still have to tie up loose ends." Brenda said, "What do you mean?" Peter said, "Don't worry, it will be over soon." He lifted the gun and shot Brenda in her head. Then he walked into her bedroom and opened up her safe with her own finger he cut off just a minute ago. He was going to just go ahead and murder her husband for $100,000, but she had too much a big mouth and told him about a safe full of diamonds that only her fingerprint would open. He smiled when he looked at all the diamonds. Then suddenly he heard a ticking sound. He wondered what it was. He looked around the room to see. Suddenly all the doors and windows locked. He assumed it was some sort of alarm from the safe being opened at a time that wasn't scheduled. He heard the ticking get louder as he looked under the bed and saw that it was a bomb. From the timer he saw that it would detonate in 10 minutes. For the next 10 minutes he looked around for a way out of the house, but when the 10th minute came, he exploded with the house. Jane was knitting in her living room. She was very happy knitting, as always, because it always relaxed her and took away a lot of stress if she was feeling stressed. Suddenly she spotted something out of the corner of her eye. There was a woman who seemed to be exhausted, resting up against her wall outside. She looked out the window, and the woman didn't seem to see her. Jane felt very sorry for the woman and wondered, was she in a weakness? So she went outside and asked her would she like to come into her house for a cup of tea. A few minutes later, the woman sat down at Jane's table, and Jane brought her a cup of tea. The woman said, "Thanks very much. You did your good deed for the day." She drank her tea. Then Jane nearly fainted with shock when the woman took out a gun and pointed it at Jane. The woman said, "Okay, I know you have lots of money in this house and jewellery, so hand it over or I'm going to shoot you." Suddenly the woman felt kind of dizzy. The gun lowered against her will and then fell to the ground. A few minutes later the woman came around. She must have fell asleep. Jane was standing in front of her smiling. It had then hit her that her tea had been drugged. The woman was tied to a chair and gagged, while Jane smiled at her and said, "You see, I actually thought you were tired. I thought you were in a weakness, and I would have still tortured you, but now that I know you were trying to rob me, well, that brings the torture to another level." Jane took out a drill and smiled, then drilled into the woman's knees as tears were rolling down her cheeks. Thanks for watching The Assassin Rapper, and if you enjoy the content then make sure to subscribe and hit the bell to be notified of new content. Ireland is full of ghost stories, and one of the most famous of them all is the story of a ghost who returned to the living world with the sole intention of righting a wrong. What makes this ghost story so famous and memorable is because James Haddock was acknowledged and celebrated by the bishop of the time, Dr. Jeremy Taylor. This gave the story a very strong foundation to be passed down through the years as an Irish ghost story. James Haddock was a farmer who lived outside of Belfast. James died in the year 1657, but after his death, his spirit had returned to the land of the living to avenge those who did him wrong. James Haddock had made a will that those who should inherit his manor house and farm were his wife Arminel. His young son John Haddock was to receive the rest of it once he reached the age of 21. Mr. Davis was the name of the executor of James's will. Davis married James's wife Arminel a few years after James's death. It was then was the start of the reason for James's spirit to start his haunting, as after James's death, Mr. Davis changed James's will where he put his own son as the beneficiary instead of John Haddock, who was the rightful heir. Davis would have got his own way only for the haunting of James Haddock. It started one night during September. James's friend Francis Taverner was on his way home to Hilborough. Nothing was out of the ordinary until suddenly his horse stopped on the Drumbridge near Brumbeg. Taverner wondered what was wrong, but didn't think much of it, so just got off his horse and led him across the bridge. Suddenly he got a start when he saw a figure in a white coat appear right in front of him. Francis couldn't believe his eyes because the white figure in front of him looked exactly like his friend James Haddock, who had passed away 5 years before. Francis was shocked to the core when the ghostly figure begged him to make sure his son was the rightful owner of the land that was due to him. Francis refused and jumped on his horse and raced away like a racehorse. Francis heard a very strong wind and screeches almost like a banshee when all of this was happening. Francis was happy to arrive home, and as soon as he did, he fell down on his knees and prayed to God to protect him from whatever he just saw. The next night, Francis still wasn't over the shock of seeing his friend's ghost when he suddenly saw him again, as he was sitting by the fire with his wife. He was disappointed his wife could not see the ghost, and wondered why. James Haddock begged and pleaded with Francis that he has to go to his wife to persuade her to make sure his son gets what is due to him and what is rightfully his. He begged for him to make sure justice was done and to right the wrong. Francis once again refused to offer any help, and due to it, he was visited by James Haddock's ghost every single night for a month. Francis was in a very bad place and knew he had to get away from it all, so he fled to Belfast. But to his horror, the ghost had followed him. He didn't know what to do. The ghost was getting more and more aggressive and was now demanding Francis go back to Arminal and punish her in the worst way for her terrible treatment of their son John. Francis was shocked and scared more than ever, as the ghost warned him that if he didn't do what he was told, there would be extreme measures taken. Francis Taverner knew he had to confide in someone and couldn't think of anyone else to go to for help besides his local chaplain. Francis explained the whole story from the very first time he saw the ghost on the bridge to the night before. When the chaplain was told not long after he had the whole story, he then went to visit Dr. Lewis Downs, who was the vicar of Belfast at the time. The three men went to see Davis to explain the ghost's message and demand. Davis laughed at the men as if he was just told a very funny joke. He refused to make any change to the will and refused to give up any land. After none of what was done so far worked, the ghost of James Haddock had told Francis Taverner to take the matter to court. Francis knew that this would be farcical, because 1, they would laugh at the idea of a ghost, and 2, there was no witness. The ghost must have known Francis's worry, as he said, "Don't worry about them not believing you, for I will appear myself in the court. When you are the judge or whoever calls upon me, I shall appear." The court was held in Carrickfergus, and it was under the title "The Court Case to Return the Estate to John Haddock." The opposing counsel mocked and jeered the idea and began to call for James's ghost to appear. He started shouting in a mocking tone, "James Haddock! James Haddock! James Haddock!" On the third mention of James's name, he received a ghostly, creepy, out-of-this-world response. Reports circulated that then, in that very moment, there was a huge clap of thunder, and the courtroom shook as if there was an earthquake. And to make matters worse, a hand appeared in the witness box, and a voice from beyond this world asked, "Is this enough?" After that, the court case was settled almost immediately. Davis left the courthouse, where crowds of onlookers shouted abuse at him. He just wanted to go home, but he never did get home. The reason Davis never reached home is because as he was riding home, he was thrown violently from his horse and broke his neck. It was after this day Francis Taverner never saw the ghost of James Haddock again. The tale of the ghost and everything that came with it was the talk of the town and reached all corners of Ireland. It was then that Bishop Jeremy Taylor put it in writing that the ghost was true. The bishop said that James Haddock's ghost was the only ghost who ever answered a summons in the court of law. James Haddock was buried in Drunbeg Parish church courtyard in the 17th century. It is said throughout history that his tombstone will never ever stand up straight. Even when it is moved upright, it just falls over. To this day it lies in moss and dirt. Is the reason the tombstone doesn't stand upright a message from James? Is he trying to tell us something?
Of all the money that e'er I spent it in good company, and of all the harm that e'er I've done, alas, it was to none but me, and all I've done for want of wit to memory I can't recall. So fill to me the parting glass. Good night and joy be with you all.
There is a Japanese urban legend called the Cowhead Story. The name might sound kind of strange or even funny, but the urban legend has a very sinister background story. The most sinister thing about the story is that the story is so scary and so haunted that no one can ever tell it without dying. The legend talks about the story, which is basically a group of students, one by one, that notice that their teacher is becoming more and more involved in the story and living it. After a while, the students are screaming for him to stop. The worst thing is, he can't. A while later, police find the bus in a ditch, which is all of the passengers foaming at the mouth, and legend has it they were in some sort of trance. The police shook them awake, and when the police asked them what happened, no one could remember how they ended up there. The Cowhead Story has no recollection of it. Some theories might pop up every so often, but maybe there are no solid conclusions because of the one thing that might stop people from telling the story, and that is the story is so scary and so haunted that no one can ever tell it without dying. I didn't want to say this, and I'm not using my face just in case I might get haunted by whatever legend it is. But when I first told the story of it, there was some weird kind of old video popped up when I was animating it as if mocking me. It was my voice speaking, saying, You won't be able to put this on, but I will put it on YouTube for you. I was wondering what it is, and what it was. It kind of creeped me out. It was almost as if it happened because I was telling you the story. I felt like, and I still feel like, even after me deleting it, that I am haunted now. What? It was a Friday night, and Sarah's parents were going out for a meal. They told her to be careful and to not answer the door to anyone. Sarah's parents were very cautious and even weren't going to go out for a meal at all because for the last few weeks in their town there were home invasions in different houses. Luckily, no one was hurt, but they didn't take any precautions, so they ran through a list of things she should do if anyone knocks at the door or acts strange. After her parents left, Sarah grabbed a drink from the fridge and then sat down to watch a good horror movie. She wasn't worried about any caller to the door, and she knew it was locked and she could call 911 if anything did happen. But her brave attitude changed fast when her phone rang and there was a creepy voice on the other side. At first, Sarah thought it was one of her friends fooling and told them don't be so stupid. The calls persisted during the night. She had rang a lot of her friends in the meantime, but none of them called her, according to them. Jack, Sarah's friend, told her, "Look, if I ever get prank calls, what I do is get a whistle and whistle as hard as I can and as loud as I can down through the phone. It will sure stop them from calling, trust me." Sarah was going to put that plan into action, and she waited till the phone ring again. She made sure that it was none of her friends. So she waited until she heard the creepy voice begin to speak again. So Sarah got her whistle and blew it as hard as she could through her phone. With that, she could hear a scream from behind her sofa, and she turned around to see a person in a ski mask holding a knife. She ran towards the door to open it, but the person grabbed her and lunged a knife into her. She fell on the ground, bleeding very heavy as the person took off their mask. She froze in horror when she looked in a mirror, and she could see herself holding a mask. Then she snapped out of her dream. She had lost time again. She wondered what had happened. Her doctor told her when she has blackouts, she imagines things. Her doctor said she has to take her medication because during her blackouts, she could hurt herself or others. She looked down on the ground at the door. Her parents lay in a pool of blood, and there was a knife in her hand. Sarah began to cry, knowing she had just killed her mom and dad. Death. That was the odour that occupied the room. The pungent smell of vomit and sweat was evident, but the stench of rotting, dead flesh was predominant. David looked fearfully at his mother, lying helpless on the bed. He knew she was sick, but the sight of her disease-eaten flesh made him feel an array of emotions. With fear being the front runner, he was scared for his mother. He did not want her to die, but the fear was also for his own well-being. The imminent fear that it could be contagious made him keep his distance. His father sat holding his mother's hand. The bits of the hand that remained, that is. The disease had stripped his caregiver of most of the muscle and flesh she had once used to nurture and care for him. All the money and power his father had was of no use against a disease such as this. World-renowned doctors and specialists had been called as soon as his mother had exhibited signs of the sickness, all to no avail. Disease does not discriminate. Janice was suffering just as the poor do, dying with no means of recovery. Necrotizing facets was the name for what ailed his mother. He had heard it on the news a while before he saw it plague his mother, the flesh-eating disease. Or if the stories he had heard around school before it closed were anything to go on, the zombie disease was a more applicable diagnosis. The fever and nausea were the first symptoms. Janice was unable to take her son to school, lying weak in her bed with her temperature climbing steadily. David's father, Jonathan, put it down to a bug of sorts, and simply picked up the slack by doing the duties around the house his wife was unable to do. By the second week of sickness, Janice was completely unable to move, with her fingers and toes taking on a darkish hue. David had continued to go to school and had heard of many of the kids talk about other people suffering from a similar sounding sickness. But in all the stories he had heard, none of them ended well. Fearing for his mother's health, David repeated these stories to his father, only to be met with reassurance and comfort. That reassurance and comfort proved to be meaningless as he now sat looking at the disease-riddled body of his mother, flesh eaten beyond comprehension, holes gaping in places unimaginable. Jonathan had tried his best by all means. As soon as he saw his wife's condition deteriorate, a number of doctors were called for consultation. They all came to the same prognosis. According to the doctors looking after her, she was one of the first to be stricken by the disease, and just as the others had, her condition had progressed. Their only suggestion was to move her to the hospital wing they had designated to those afflicted with the disease. Before moving her, Jonathan thought to take David to see the hospital where they would care for his mother. They discussed the matter with her and decided to make the trip the next day. "You've been avoiding me, baby. Janice said once alone with David. "I'm just scared, Mum. I don't want you to die," came David's reply. Laughing, Janice told David, "That's not something you need to worry about, my son. What you do need to worry about is how comfy my room there is going to be," joining in with his mother's laughter. David finally dropped his inhibitions and sat close to his mother. Resting his head on her bed, she stroked his head as he fell asleep. He had not slept long at the bedside of his mother, but his dreams were those of zombies and those that hunted. Necrotizing Facetus. His father woke him to go to bed, and the disturbance of the dreams was a thorough welcome by David. Walking half asleep towards the door, he could but help glance back at his mother. He could feel the tears well up as the woman lying in the bed closely resembled those creatures that haunted his dream. The drive to the hospital the next day was excruciating. The silence seemed to drill deep into David's core as he sat next to his father. He could feel the sadness and pain emanating from the man he had always viewed as an absolute pillar of strength and wisdom. When the journey had finally ended and they sat in the car park of the hospital, David suddenly burst into tears. The stark reality of the possibility of losing his mother had hit him like a freightliner moving at remarkable speeds. His father hesitated for a second, unsure of what the appropriate response would be, given that he too felt so unable to do anything he wanted to cry to. He held his son. The two embraced tightly and said nothing. No words could have helped either feel better. The dark clouds drifting in the sky outside them closely resembled the way both of them felt inside, cold and lost. The bright lights in the hospital corridor beat down on them. They winced as they walked in, waiting for their eyes to adjust. "Good morning. We're here to view and book a room in the CDC wing, please," Jonathan asked. We're sorry to inform you. There has been an incident in the CDC room, sir. We're not accepting any new patients at the moment." "What? That's preposterous. What kind of incident?" Jonathan shouted at the nurse. Before she could answer, the doors to the CDC wing burst open, and what looked like the remains of a man ran through the doors, leaving footprints of blood behind him. He lunged at a woman seated on the chairs outside the Centre for Disease Control, and people were too shocked to respond. Pinning her down, Jonathan and David could see the sick man biting and clawing at the woman's face. Blood and flesh flew everywhere. He had more holes in him than flesh. Bits of bone could be seen through the loose hanging hospital gown that covered the eaten man. The disease had all but devoured his body, and it was a miracle he was able to move. "Does that answer your question, sir?" the nurse screeched as she made a beeline for the exit. Dragging David, Jonathan followed the panicked crowds through the door and towards the car park. The only people left in the hospital were the zombie-looking individual and his victim. Well, what was left of her after he had eaten his fill and pulled all her intestines out through the hole he had chewed in her stomach. Rushing to get in the car, David and Jonathan said nothing as they ran and pushed their way through the crowds to get where they were going. Locking themselves in their car, they merely sat where they were, not moving and not saying anything, bursting into tears once again. David was the only one to finally break the silence. "We have to get home to Mom, Dad." As they pulled into the driveway, Jonathan had already begun giving David instructions. As soon as we get in, you need to go up to your room and pack a bag. We're going to go straight to the airport and get on a plane to India. Your Uncle Kieran mentioned something about doctors working and stuff like this there. We'll take your mother and this will be all sorted out. Come straight to the room when you're packed. Almost as soon as the car was stationary, David leapt out of the car and ran up the driveway and into his house. Jonathan was close behind. As Jonathan made his way into his bedroom, he could hear his son cursing and banging his cupboard doors. He too would pack a bag for him and his wife, and they would leave to a safer place. Having finished packing some clothes into a bag, David closed it and ran out of his room. The tears had begun to dry, and a smile crept over his face at the thought of 3 of them flying to India to make Mum better. Who knows, maybe Uncle Kieran would be waiting at the airport for them. Bursting through the door of his parents' room, the smile that had recently formed once again dissolved to tears. There would be no trip to the airport, let alone India. Straddling her husband on their bed, David could see his mother. Her head was buried in her husband's chest as she feasted. Jonathan's hand dangled off the bed, drenched in his own blood. The only thing David could hear over his loud breaths was the grotesque sound of his mother chewing and slurping the bits of flesh and blood she was stuffing her face with. Standing there frozen, David saw his mother turn to face him. What now looked him in the eye was not his mother. Blood dripping from its chin, dead eyes staring, it stood up, leaving Jonathan lying on the bed with holes chewed in his body. David felt his legs give out. "Mom?" he said weakly, tears streaming down his cheeks, hoping something inside of the creature would hear and recognize her son, and perhaps grant him mercy. The ground seemed to shake as it took a step towards him. Thanks for watching The Assassin Rapper, and if you enjoy the content, then make sure to subscribe and hit the bell to be notified of new content. Tony was lying on the operating table after being in a near-fatal accident. The doctors were performing an emergency operation on him, and they knew that he was dying, but they kept trying to save him. God knows enough people died in this hospital lately, a doctor said. Tony could hear them speaking. Suddenly he heard one of the nurses say, "We have lost all vital signs." He then found himself falling in through a tunnel, and he remembered hearing about a dark tunnel and a light people see just before they die. He then was looking down at the operation table from floating above. He wondered, was this an out-of-body experience? Was he dead? He must be, if there were no vital signs. Then suddenly he heard a nurse speaking to him. "Don't give up. It's not your time to go. Keep fighting. Keep fighting. Don't give up whatever you do. Keep fighting." The nurse had a strong Irish accent. She continued to speak. "Tony, you have so much more to do in this world. Don't give up. Come back. Don't leave. Your time to go is not now." Suddenly, Tony wasn't floating over the bed anymore, but he was back in his body and could hear a doctor say, "Wow, that was something else. He was almost gone for 10 whole minutes." A nurse said, "Vital signs are stable." Tony smiled, and a few minutes later he was speaking to the nurse. But he realised it wasn't the nurse that saved him by asking him to not give up. The nurse said, "You gave us all a fright, Tony, but what just happened was nothing short of a miracle. You were dead for 10 whole minutes." Tony said, "Could I please thank the nurse with the Irish accent, please? She kept telling me don't give up, and that is what made me pull back from crossing over." The doctor said, "Tony, there is no one here with an Irish accent." Tony could see that they all had serious faces on them, and wondered why. The nurse said to the doctor, "Well, luckily we don't have the nurse with that accent around her anymore." Tony asked, "Why? What's wrong with her?" The nurse said, "The only nurse around here with an accent from Ireland was this crazy woman. She murdered 14 of our patients, and when she was found out, she shot herself in the head. Just before she did shoot herself, she started rambling on about she would make sure we all pay for getting her caught." Suddenly the woman froze, and the doctors, when the nurse with the accent from Ireland appeared and said, "I made my penance after I killed those patients, and I proved it by bringing this patient back to life. But as for the doctors and nurses, who were the reason I was caught experimenting with murder, well, that's a different story. Within 2 minutes, everyone in the room were killed besides Tony. Soon after, the police were called, and Tony was arrested for multiple homicide of the nurses and doctors that were killed by the ghost of the nurse who saved him." Thanks for watching The Assassin Rapper, and if you enjoy the content, then make sure to subscribe and hit the bell to be notified of new content. Alice was very tired of being bullied in school. She knew the teachers knew she was being bullied, but they didn't care. She told her dad, but he just said ignore them. She knew she couldn't ignore them. How could she? She used to cry herself to sleep every night, praying and wishing and hoping they would just leave her alone. One day she went for a walk in the woods to try to forget about everything that was happening. She got a fright when she happened to walk right into her bullies. They started mocking her, and one of the girls hit Alice, and she fell down and hit a rock. She had hit her elbow, and there was blood on the rock. That weekend, Alice's dad bought her a pet rabbit to cheer her up. Alice was delighted to have a pet rabbit and called it White Rabbit. The next day she had realised the rabbit escaped. She ran out of the house and saw the rabbit outside her door, as if waiting for her. She said, "White Rabbit, don't run away like that, giving me a fright." The rabbit started running into the woods, and Alice found it hard to keep up. She had realised the rabbit stopped by the rock where her blood was on. Alice found it spooky. Why would the rabbit run to that rock? She picked up her rabbit and brought him home. That Monday it was like magic. Her bullies weren't bullying her, and they spoke to her like she was always their friend. After school, Alice invited them to see a cool tree in the woods that they could climb. When they got into the woods and reached the tree, before they could step another step closer, they all screamed as they fell down a hole. It was a giant rabbit hole. Alice looked down, smiling, and said, "What's down there gave me the power to ye stop bullying me. But what is down there also has the power to make sure you will never bully me or anyone else ever again." Thanks for watching The Assassin Rapper, and if you enjoy the content, then make sure to subscribe and hit the bell to be notified of new content. Simon was walking down the street, ready to deliver a package to the local TV station. It was a 24-hour news network called Channel 6 News. He knew that he had to reach a huge audience, and he knew that when he broadcasted his statement, he had to do it before midnight on December 31st, 2020. He wasn't sure would it make any difference, but it was all he could do. He knew he had to try. He met the security guard and told him he had a package to deliver. The security man brought him into the office. Once inside, Simon took out his gun and pointed it at the security guard and said, "Okay, listen to me. I am not playing around. Take me to the main news broadcasting room. I want to go live before midnight. It is now 11 p.m, so I am not kidding. Take me there now." The security guard took Simon to the main room and said, "I am so sorry, Miss Casey and Mr. Warren, but this guy said he was going to kill me if I didn't take him in here. He told me he wants to broadcast a statement." The presenters were stunned, as were the camera people in front of them and the people upstairs looking down from the control room. Simon said, "Okay, what the man said is true. I need to make a statement, live, and I need to make it soon." Mr. Warren said, "Look, calm down, son. You can't just walk into a news station and demand to give a live statement." The second Simon walked into the room, they had cut to a commercial break, so no one was seeing what was happening. Simon held the gun to Mr. Warren's head and said, "I am going to blow your bloody head off unless you get me on that bloody camera now to me give a live statement, and I don't want it on delay. I want it to go out live." Mr. Warren tried to run and bring Miss Casey with him. Suddenly Simon got startled, and by accident his gun went off and shot Mr. Warren in his head. He shouted, "Look what she made me do!" He ran over to the security officer and said, "Get me live on air now." The security thought Simon was going to kill him, so he quickly got out his gun and pulled the trigger and shot Simon in his head. Simon fell dead on the ground. The police were called, and when an officer was searching his pocket, he found a piece of paper, which he thought must have been the script of the live statement he was talking about. It was midnight. He heard a strange sound, and people near the window shouted in amazement. He hadn't time to even read the first line of the statement, but he heard them shouting from upstairs. "What the hell is that?" He ran up to see what it was, and when he looked out the window, all he could see were UFOs all over the sky, and the sky had turned red. He looked down at the piece of paper and read, "I can't give this message online. They will find me that way. The only way is live on TV. They might still find me, but at least that way they won't be able to take it down straight away. I know that if I tried to mention it online, they would have words flagged to it be disrupted before I get the truth out. After midnight tonight, there will be an alien invasion. This was known for months, if not years, by the elite around the world. Some of the aliens are here already. They were here for a very long time. I don't exactly know how long. Tonight your president and elite government members around the world are sitting comfortable in underground bunkers. Those bastards did a deal with an alien race. It's a new world order. They're going to take over Earth. Humanity is going to be wiped out tonight. Besides those elite bastards. I don't know what is in it for the elite, but I overheard this information. If anyone knew what I knew, I would have been killed. But I am telling ye tonight. With that, there were beams beamed into the studio, and everyone seemed to disappear. This was happening one by one. It seemed to the security guard that it took ages to the beam reach him. He thought to himself if the guy was allowed to give the statement, it might not have changed anything, but if people had known and had an underground bunker like those bunkers the Doomsday Prophecy people have had for years, then they would have a fighting chance. The beam landed on the security guard, and he disappeared into thin air. Down in a bunker, the president spoke. Well, my friends, there is food and essentials for about a week. We were promised the air above will be clean in about 5 days, so we just have to suffer the boredom down here. But when we're above, my friends, we will be in a much better world. We will be in a world that us and the reptilians can coexist in the open and not hidden like we have been for so long. I am afraid of what's lurking in the dark, yet I am afraid to put on the light. I just feel like standing here, waiting to the natural light come in when the morning comes. I can feel the evil all around me. It sends shivers up my spine. I am tired of standing, so I will sit. I feel like sleeping, but I can't sleep. I feel tired, but at the same time, I feel wired. The light switch is there, right across the room from me. I could stand up and walk over any minute and leave this god-forsaken room, open the door and just leave, and never come back. But I don't want to. I went from sitting down on the ground to lying down. I fell in between sleep and waking. I didn't want to fall asleep, as if I fell asleep, then what was in the dark could have all its own way. I could smell a horrible smell. I could feel a presence. The morning came. I was lying down as long as I could without opening my eyes. But I knew I eventually had to, and sure enough when I did, there were 4 of my friends lying in a pool of blood. I don't know what came over me, but I killed them all. I couldn't control myself. What will I do now? How can I live with this? Then I could hear something. I got a start. I looked out the window. There was a police car. I didn't expect to be caught so soon. Then I froze as the police came in and ignored me. Then I realized they weren't ignoring me. As I could see, there were more bodies on the ground than 4. That's because the 5th one was the dead body of myself that lay there on the ground with my friends. Then it dawned on me about taking the tablets last night to overdose. They had worked. I was dead. Then something told me to look out the window, and I saw 4 of my friends staring right at me. Tom was a very skilled hacker and could hack almost anything. He hacked various government organizations, and the thrill was huge, but he wanted to go on to the next level. He used to work his way around the dark web like he owned the place, but what really made him stand up and take notice is the internet rumour of there being a Marina's Web. The Marina's Web got its name from the Marina Trench, which is the deepest part of the ocean. There was meant to be all sorts of huge secrets revealed in that deepest part of the dark web. He knew the difference between the deep and dark web. The deep web was mostly medical records and police records, etc. And the dark web was where all the bad stuff goes on, like hiring serial killers and human experiments against a person's will, etc. But in the Marina's Web, he heard the world's most top secrets are revealed, like the Vatican archives and the secret location of Atlantis. As exciting as all that sounded to him, it was a bigger and deeper agenda he had than access those secrets. He just had to know if it was real. He heard the rumour and didn't take much notice of it until one night he was eavesdropping on his dad and heard him speaking about an artificial intelligence that no one can tap into because there is a certain algorithm needed and it is impossible to find without a quantum computer. The thing is, his dad works in the government and he knows there is a quantum computer in the building. He just needs to find a way in. Through intensive research how to hack the building's security system, he found a way in. And once he was near the quantum computer, he knew he had a very limited time. He was disappointed that nothing was happening, just the usual dark web, until the screen went black, then green, and an angry-looking emoji popped up with writing, "Marina's Web, AI system accessed." He smiled with excitement and wondered what would he try to find using the AI and the algorithm. The secret location of Atlantis, the Vatican secrets. It all seemed exciting now that he knew that he was in the AI system. His face dropped when he saw what was on the screen. It said, "World War III activated. Earth will be destroyed in 10 seconds. Then the countdown began. Thanks for watching The Assassin Rapper, and if you enjoy the content then make sure to subscribe and hit the bell to be notified of new content. Michael was searching for a place to stay in New York as he was offered a new job in Brooklyn. He was feeling disheartened as the more places he searched, the more he felt he couldn't afford anywhere as there was no place that met his budget. But suddenly, when he was just about to give up, something caught his eye. He had to read it twice to make sure he wasn't imagining it. There was an apartment in a building in Brooklyn, just a few blocks from where he was starting his job. He couldn't believe his luck, so he emailed the company right away, and a week later he moved in and was lying down on his bed smiling at the fact he had a place of his own in Brooklyn and was about to start a new job. He began to read a book and relax as he was starting work in a week. He was feeling tired and was about to go to sleep, so he laid the book down beside him on the bed. Then he suddenly got a start when something like a shadow moved on the wall in front of him. He looked around expecting to see someone that made the shadow, but no one was there. No one was in the room. The shadows began moving around the room. He couldn't make any sense of them. Michael found it very hard to go to sleep that night, but eventually he slipped into a deep sleep. The next night, the same thing happened. The next day he was walking down the street and past a street basketball court. He knew that the guys playing were looking at him strangely, so he asked could he help them. One guy said to Michael, "You're that guy who moved into room 456 in the building right up the block, right?" Michael was surprised these strangers knew and replied, "Yes, how do you know that? And why do you ask?" The boy said, "Man, did you hear anything about that place? There's weird stuff happens there, that's all I'm saying." Michael was thinking about the boy's words, and instead of carrying on for his walk around the blocks like he usually did since he arrived in Brooklyn, he walked right back to his apartment. He opened his laptop and searched his address. He froze in horror when he saw a photo of a little boy and a man and woman on the screen. He guessed they were his parents. As he read on, he learned that the little boy was out playing one day when a Necronomicon book from H.P. Lovecraft was thrown out the window from stories above and hit the boy on the head. The boy suffered memory loss and trauma and was put into foster care, and his parents were found in the apartment with their bodies mutilated. There was no evidence of anyone in the apartment, and no conclusion as to what really happened to the boy's parents. Michael heard of H.P. Lovecraft before, and knew about his famous monster, Cthulhu. Then suddenly shivers ran up his spine as he thought of the shadows going up and down the wall many times since he arrived in the apartment. They reminded him of what Cthulhu looks like that he saw down through the years. He remembered when he was a kid reading comics, and the character was in loads of the pages in different forms of horror. Then suddenly Michael heard a noise, and he screamed when he saw a weird-looking monster in front of him, which even though he couldn't believe his eyes, knew that it had to be Cthulhu. He screamed as the monster rushed for him, and as he backed back more and more, Michael fell through the glass out the window and fell on the ground and was killed instantly. As he was falling to his death, his memory came back. It was always Cthulhu who was making sure of Michael's fate. Michael got his job in Brooklyn and found the apartment and was drawn here by the spirit of Cthulhu, who hadn't finished him years ago. The curse only had power in the apartment. Just before he hit the ground, he had remembered he was that little boy in the photograph so many years ago that got knocked unconscious by the Necronomicon being thrown from his apartment. Now the job is done, and now Michael is gone.
I let myself go blind. When I was 25, I was told that my sight would fade away like a TV losing signal. Hard shapes would turn soft, and eventually they would be nothing but a current of running colors. Then black. More than black. Nothing. Hard to describe nothing. But that's what I see. But it didn't have to be this way. Not yet. If I was diligent with my medication, if I followed the set schedule and paid attention to the signs that my body was giving me, it could have been decades before I lost my sight. I could lead a full, happy life if I chose. That was 7 years ago. I never took a pill or went to an appointment. I never tried to save my eyes, and I was glad to have them rot. The food deliveries come weekly. Everything I need is brought right to my door, and the things I don't are taken care of without my having to step a foot in the hallway or even take my trash to the garbage chute. The world beyond my door is unknown. In my apartment, I know every inch of the floor, every corner, every bureau and coffee table. I can move around without a walking stick. I can even jog if my phone is ringing in a distant room. I have no fear of getting hurt like I did in the early days of my disability. I live here on my own. I am safe. I am content. When I do speak to people, on the rare occasion where I must, they always ask, what happened? But I can't tell them it was preventable. They wouldn't understand. I woke in the middle of the night. I had been in a deep sleep, but when I woke, I wasn't tired or groggy, but my heart was pushing against my chest in heavy thuds, like it was trying to break through the bones that kept it safe. I didn't remember having any bad dreams. Why was I so scared? Or was I? My body behaved as if I was terrified, but my mind had no way to place it. I lay there and hoped I would eventually be able to calm down. I forced myself to slow my breathing. I gripped the sheets under my grimy palms. It worked. The chills in my back warmed. My anxiety dripped from me in thick waves of sweat staining the mattress beneath me. Now that I could feel my body calm down, I felt something else. Something mundane. I had to pee. I smiled. A thought like that can only occur to somebody who's not in danger. It had all been in my head, some forgotten dream. So I hurried to the bathroom. Before I knew what happened, I was falling. My shins had smashed into something in the middle of the room. 3 of my fingers bent back and cracked beneath the weight of my body as I dropped to the floor. My head knocked against the hard wood, and for a moment I lost track of where I was. The pain in my hand was so blinding I could hardly think. But when I did think, when I did come back to my senses, body still throbbing, I only had one thought. The coffee table had moved. I didn't want to believe this. I didn't want to remember. But I knew. There was no mystery here. I knew who had done this. In a way, I'd been waiting for this day for a long time. I had been waiting for her. I picked myself up, The broken fingers cradled like a bloody claw in my hand and limped crooked to the bathroom, careful not to run into anything else along the way. The apartment was foreign to me now. This was no longer a home. It was a foxhole. I locked the door and ran the cold water, letting it numb my hand. For a moment, the relief was so great, I almost forgot to be afraid. When that moment passed, I realized I hadn't checked the bathroom to make sure I was alone. I listened. She was here. I could hear the shower curtain blowing forward and easing back like a flag pushed by a chilled breeze. My heart locked like the first time I saw her. It was the clearest memory I had of my life before losing my sight. I was a child. My sister and I had been playing a game in the living room during a storm, which caused a blackout. Without TV, games were all we had to keep ourselves entertained. When we had finished all the regulars, ending with Battleship, it was time to go over something more substantial. We decided on finally finishing a full game of Monopoly, which meant I would have to go to the basement. I remember the sound of thunder, like some creature roaring in the dark. I could even smell the rain, but the storm didn't scare me. I wasn't afraid of anything at that age, not even the basement. The light was very bright since my father had replaced the single bowl with a set of fluorescent tubes. The stairs, which had once been rotting wood, were now metal steps, and the silver surface caught the white lights in such a way to make you feel like you were going down into a spaceship. The floor was cement, newly finished and bright gray. There was nothing to be afraid of. I moved to the shelf where the game sat and ran my fingers along the boxes until I found Monopoly. She was already there, sitting against the wall, holding her knees, her face buried between them. At first I wasn't afraid because I didn't understand. She wore a white dress, though the bottoms were caked in mud. I opened my mouth to speak. She lifted up her eyes to meet mine. They were full of tears and mourning. But when she saw me, she blinked the sadness away, and all that was left was hate. She stood. I ran up the stairs, screaming for my mom. When I told her what I had seen, she took me by the hand and led me back down the stairs, pulling me by the wrist, nearly popping my shoulder out of the socket. With each step we took, the air in my lungs was taken from me as if we were going underwater, as if my mother was trying to drown me. She tried to explain. She knew there was no one here. She had already come down to the basement. She already checked every inch of it. It was empty, she told me. But I wouldn't let it go. I knew what I saw. And so she dragged me, screaming and wailing, down and down, one step at a time. And as we went, I looked to the corner where the woman had been. First I saw her feet, bare and bloodied, then the muddy dress, and the sharp nails spiking from each finger. "See?" my mother said, pointing to the woman. "There's no one here. Nothing. It's your imagination." I couldn't move. I only stared. When I said nothing, my mother let go of my hand and marched back up the stairs, mistaking my fear for resignation. She left me there on my own. And as soon as she was gone from sight, the woman in the basement attacked me. I spent weeks, sometimes months of my childhood in hospitals after that day, with doctors trying to understand my seizures. But how can a seizure break bones or leave scratches all over my body? I eventually stopped telling them what I saw. The medicine they gave me only made me drowsy. But it never stopped the attacks. And then one day, like a miracle from heaven, I was told I would go blind. No one understood my calm, my quiet acceptance. My friends begged me to take my medication, to take care of myself. But I knew that this was the only way to stop her from attacking me. She only came when I saw her, only when my eyes met hers. One by one, my friends fell away. I stopped leaving the house as my sight got worse, and I had no one to help me navigate the world beyond my door. The attack stopped. I was right. Or at least I had been until tonight. She was there, just behind me. I heard the crinkling of the plastic shower curtain, the broken exhale of the shallow breaths. Slow and steady as I could, I opened the bathroom door and limped my way through the living room, my legs brushing the coffee table I had tripped over. The door to the corridor outside my apartment was only 7 steps from where I stood. I imagined myself going through it, hurrying down the hall and the staircase. It had been so long since I stepped foot outside my apartment, I wasn't sure I could even find the stairs. And if I did, if I reached the street, I would have no one to call. Nowhere to go. I had so expertly separated myself from the world that I could find myself entirely alone, even on a crowded street. So I stood there, 7 steps from escape, and did not move an inch. The bathroom door creaked as it fell open. The floorboards whined closer and closer to me. "Why now?" I asked out loud. In that moment, I understood. This had been her plan. All my life, I had been with people, from my parents to doctors, teachers, friends. I had never been alone. Not until I moved and let my sight fade. She had been waiting all these years while I cultivated a life of solitude, as if waiting for a fruit to ripen. She had been waiting for the moment when, even if I could run, I didn't have the knowledge or means to escape her. And even if I did, I had no one to call, no place to go. I had done this to myself. I had built a trap, and now, with ease and delight, she sprung it. Her chilled breath blew on my neck. Cold. It was ice cold.
Tony was found dead inside his office by 2 police officers. If you ever wanted to be an armchair sleuth, here is your chance to see can you help the police by finding clues that will deter whether this scene is a suicide or murder scene. Take a good look around the room and see what you can spot to help you make your informed decision. Don't leave no stone uncovered. Be sure to look out for anything that can point you in the right direction of solving this case. Have you your answer ready? Let's see. Are your super sleuthing skills enough to help the police in cracking this case wide open? Is this a suicide or a murder? First, let's look at the clues. The man's cup seems to tell us he might be right-handed, so the gun on the left doesn't seem to be right for him to use his left hand. The place seems to be full of mess also, which means it seems like there was a struggle in the room. Also, if you took notice at the start of the video, there is a man running in the background outside the window. Could he be the perp? The evidence is pointing to it be a murder. On closer examination, the person outside the window was later identified as a jogger, and there was a suicide note on the table. The police have ruled this crime scene as a suicide, especially when they have examined CCTV footage and no one entered the room or exited it between the hours it took place. Karen was driving down a dark country road just beside the woods. She was tired and wanted to just get home. As she was driving, it felt like she was getting nowhere. She felt like she was falling asleep so much, and she didn't want to, and wanted to just keep driving and driving until she was at home and get into her own bed and fall fast asleep. She knew she had to stop to have a rest, so she parked her car. When she was stopped, she went to open the door to get some fresh air, but she was locked in the car. Karen has a hammer. What way could Karen get out of the car when the door is locked? You can listen to some music while you try to come up with the answer, and I'll be back in a very short moment to give you the answer, and you can see, are you correct? I hope you enjoyed that music while you were considering how could Karen get out of the locked car with a hammer inside. Did you say she could break the window? She could, but then her dad would be mad that she wrecked his car window. She had realized that all she had to do was open the door, knowing car doors don't be locked from inside. It was her paranoia and tiredness made her think the door was locked. Picture the scenario. A woman shoots her husband, then holds him underwater. That evening, the woman and her husband have dinner together. How is this possible, you might ask? This riddle you don't get to see the real crime scene, but from what I just told you, can you give me a rational answer as to how the couple went out for dinner together? I repeat, a woman shoots her husband, then holds him underwater. That evening, the woman and her husband have dinner together. How is this possible? Once again, here is some music. Do you try to put your detective skills to work? I'll be back after this short music and give you the answer, and you can see, did you put your detective skills to good use? You might wonder, how can a man go for dinner with his wife after being shot and held underwater? But did you listen to my words carefully? I clearly said that you don't get to see the real crime scene. What those words meant were that the woman shot her husband with her camera and held his photograph underwater to develop in the darkroom, and then they happily went out for dinner together. So there is your answer. If you got it right, Kudos to you, Columbo. Thanks for watching the Assassin Rapper, and if you enjoy the content, then make sure to subscribe and hit the bell to be notified of new content.